a movie that is actually one of my personal favorites. It's called The Amityville Horror from 1979, directed by Stuart Rosenberg. Now, this movie, I know there are people out there who don't really like this movie, who don't think it's a great movie. And in fact, I know there are some people who think that Amityville Part 2 is a better movie than the Amityville Horror. I personally don't agree with that, but, you know, the Amityville Horror, I think, whether you love it or you don't, it is one of the most famous haunting cases of all time. It's supposedly based on a true story of George and Catherine Lutz, and they wrote a book about it with J. Anson, which became this huge bestseller, just sold millions of copies. And then they decided to make this movie, and the movie was such a massive hit. It was apparently the biggest independent film for many years, up until I think the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles overtook it. So it made a ton of money, and it launched a whole series of movies, including at least 2 very direct sequels, and then a whole bunch of other movies that are maybe not even quite related, but they're part of the Amityville universe. And they also did a remake, and there were also a huge number of books about this case, that people have written, sort of taking a look at it. And this is, of course, one of the cases, and it's probably the case that made them famous. This is Ed and Lorraine Warren, who we've mentioned before, and we're going to talk about again. They investigated the Amityville haunting, and they declared it to be an authentic haunting back in the 70s. So for whatever that's worth, it was, I think everybody's heard of this. I think everybody's heard of the Amityville Horror. It's just such a cultural phenomenon. It's just, I think this movie, if for no other reason than that, needs to be on this list. But I personally love it. I saw this movie when I was a kid. I was probably about 10 years old, and saw it on TV, and it scared the crap out of me. I remember lying in bed later that night and in the darkness, and I was afraid to open my eyes, because there's a scene in the movie where Margot Kidder looks out the window and she sees these 2 eyes shining in the darkness, and I just was afraid I was going to see eyes shining in the darkness if I opened my eyes and looked. So anyway, from a personal point of view, I found this movie to be very, very scary and very effective as a kid, and I watched it every chance I got over the years. But this movie, is also, I think, very influential, or at least it contains a lot of the things that we're going to see over and over again. One of the things that I think we will see in other movies, and we see here very clearly, is that one of the parents, in this case the father, kind of becomes possessed by the evil, and he kind of becomes a threat to his family. That's kind of the overarching story here, because it's based on, there were a series of murders that took place in this house in 1974. This is a true story. The convicted killer, Ronald DeFeo Jr., killed his whole family in 1974. And so George and Catherine Lutz, they bought this house, and nobody really wanted it because these murders had taken place there, and they got it cheap. And then they supposedly experienced all these supernatural things, and wound up having to leave the house. And I think part of the implication is that the evil of the house possessed Ronald DeFeo Jr. and made him kill his family. And the same thing is starting to happen in this movie to James Brolin, who stars as George Lutz, and Margot Kidder stars as Catherine, his wife. And
Margot Kidder's second time on the show.
Yes, absolutely. Margot Kidder, she's in a lot of movies I really like for some reason. But it's got that storyline of one of the parents, and it's most often the father, who seems to be going a little crazy or seems to be getting possessed by the evil. I don't know. I think it's it's just a movie that I love. It also, it contains the dog who knows something is wrong. We see the dog scratching away at the wall in the basement, and it's also the hidden room or the hidden place in the basement, you know, because they break through the wall and discover a room that's been kind of hidden there.
The red room.
The red room, yes. So yeah, I mean, you know, there's a lot that could be said about it. I just find it extremely compelling. I can watch it anytime. I enjoy it. Rod Steiger plays a priest who, you know, tries to come to the house to bless the house, but he is overtaken by the evil and chased out of the house. And apparently, in terms of the true story aspect of it, the real life priest has said at different points that, yeah, he did hear a voice in the house and it told him to get out. So, you know, as kooky as it may be, there is some amount of evidence that this could be a real haunting. Although I think a lot of people have tried to expose it and say it's not a real haunting. As you were saying about Ed and Lorraine Warren, it's questionable. You know, they say it was real, but the good news is they're not in this movie. So it's strictly about the family, and it's from the
Did
point
you
of
see
view
what I did there when I said thank God? Their religious background.
Yeah, perfect.
What's interesting about this movie is that, so I did look into a lot of the behind the scenes stuff with this. So since you've seen this movie a lot, maybe you can remind me. I don't remember them mentioning the Indian burial ground in the movie, which is weird because that would go on to be a trope in these movies.
Yeah.
And that was part of the real story.
Yeah.
But I don't think it was part of the movie at all.
Well, they do mention it. It's
okay.
It's not really something they dwell on a lot, but they do mention it, particularly when they're in the basement and they do sort of get into that room.
Mm-hmm.
There is some mention of this being an old Indian burial ground, and they say something about also the crazy people were brought here and left to die. It might be a separate incident. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Okay. So as far as the actual story goes, Indian burial ground, I guess some chief was killed there, and then some kid dug up the grave and used his head as a football, like a soccer ball or something, and that pissed off the chief, and that's when he started haunting the ground, not the house. So the house was not the issue. It was the sacred ground that was desecrated by that kid. And then the whole get out thing was him saying to get off the property, get away from here, not to get out the house. But they just they built a house on the property was the issue. They didn't make this movie saying, hey, we should go with one of the big tropes in these movies is, you know, trope became a trope over time. But it's kind of funny, even if they didn't mention it, they didn't make that seem to be the genesis of what's going on. So I didn't see the remake, but for instance, the remake or if an original movie was made on this story now, I could see that being a big part of it. Well, what led to the haunting, and let's do the research, that would be a big part of like how the movie would unfold. But that didn't seem to be a big part of the story that was told on screen, at least.
No.
It is that aspect of it.
No, it's not. And in a way, I think that's good because I don't know whether the whole Indian burial ground thing is considered to be cool anymore for people to be making movies about that.
Well, this wasn't, we're not talking about a movie made now, but back then.
No.
But you're saying if they remade it now, you're saying?
Well, I'm saying maybe it's good that they didn't dwell on it because it, maybe
it wouldn't have aged as well.
Yeah, maybe that's what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. And I mean, this movie, like, you can view it as a little bit of that. Is it real or is it in their heads? Because it's a family that moves in and they start to disintegrate. They start to have all these problems, and some of them are kind of realistic problems. Money goes missing. Where did the money go? They're having problems. They think that the house is in some way haunted, and they move out. They get out. But because we don't have the experts coming in and saying, oh yes, this is definitely a haunting, I think it works better because we don't know 100% for sure how much of it is real and how much of it is just their experience of it, or are they in fact lying, and is this just a story they're telling to try and have a best-selling book? We don't know. But to me, it works because it is really just about them. And I find them to be relatively sympathetic, being in this situation and bad things are happening and they're looking for an explanation. Like, oh, well, maybe there is some evil force here that's messing with us.
Yeah, there's certain aspects of the movie I didn't really quite get. Why does the husband go crazy? We've seen that trope before, but there's usually an explanation. He just wakes up one morning and says, "I'm crazy." It's just like, wait, what did I miss? What drove me over the top? The only connection they show is that he looked almost exactly like the guy that killed the family, which again has nothing to do with the true story. And also, what's interesting too is James Brolin had a brother, and his brother was actually the one that played, or at least in the photo of the previous killer. I thought it was just Brolin himself, but this is brother that way.
Yeah. Well, I think it's supposed to be the evil possessing him, and it's supposed to be the idea that the evil possessed the other guy and caused him to do this, and now it's possessing him. And I think,
but it would have been nice if they visually showed us something.
Yeah,
he's just chopping wood. I'm crazy. I'm chopping wood. Well, show us something that happened.
Yeah. Well, I think there is a descent. I mean, I think he starts out very reasonable, and then he gets more and more crazy, and he looks worse and worse. And I think maybe the implication is that they look alike because they're kind of letting themselves go. They're letting the beard and the hair kind of get really long, kind of like me. So I'm possessed by the evil now as well. But maybe that's what it is there. I'm not sure. But I think they're suggesting it's
your house built on an Indian burial ground too?
Not that I know of. I don't think so. I don't think so. It's a big apartment block, so who knows? But no, I don't think so.
So the Warrens thinks it's haunted, and there was also a parapsychologist who actually thinks it's haunted, but they clash. I guess there's a lot of tension between the parapsychologist and the Warrens. That's like a big backstory. I think that would make an interesting movie, like how much they dislike each other, but they both kind of agree in terms of something's going on there, type situation. The backstory is kind of interesting. This movie doesn't click for me as much as it clicks for you, because there's no like emotional connection to when it came out. And also, like, I think the execution isn't great, but I was more entertained than I thought I would be. Like, I came into this thinking, like, it deserves to be on this list because it made a lot of money, it cost very little, and it spawned all these sequels, so it definitely belonged on this list without question. I didn't think I would like it. There are the elements that I don't like about it. I knew I wouldn't like about it going into it because I've seen it before a long time ago. One is that the ending didn't really do anything for me. They weren't really building to anything. They didn't really know how to end it, so the ending didn't work. The way he turned crazy, like, it didn't. The execution wasn't there for me. So I knew I wouldn't like those elements going into it. So I wasn't disappointed in those elements when I watched it again. Those were only two things that I didn't like. Aside from that, I thought it was pretty good. I thought adding Rod Steiger in there is something that was a brilliant move. With these horror movies, you have like these cookie cutter, good looking, B-level type female lead actor and actress. And then you really try to get the prestige or the really good acting scenes with like some character actor who's not really quite a good lead because he doesn't have the looks for a lead, or he's too old to be a lead. And that's where you get like the really good acting scenes, like the Bela Lugosi's and Boris Karloff's and stuff like that. Rod Steiger kind of added to that, in that I think he's a great actor, one of those like original method actors. And I thought his scenes were really good as far as like the way they were executed, with the horror aspects of it, and also with his performance. So I thought his scenes really elevated the film a lot. James Brolin, not the biggest fan. He hasn't come in a lot of movies that were great. I'm a bigger fan of his son, more so than I am of his, but I thought he was really good, and it's probably one of his better performances. And then you also have Margot Kidder, not the biggest fan of hers, but she looked great physically. I mean, this is probably as hot as I've ever seen her look. She's come in a few movies I've liked, Superman, and she came in another like horror movie where she had like a twin sister.
Yeah, Sisters. Yeah.
Yeah, Sisters. Yeah. So she's come in a few movies I've liked. This is probably right up there with, I think, her better performances and her better movies.
Hmm.
So overall, like I really did like this movie. Like I said, just those two elements that I knew I wouldn't like going into it. But aside from that, it's pretty good.
Hmm. Yeah, and for me, of course, because I have the nostalgia from when I was a kid, I love it, and I can watch it anytime. So for me, it's definitely a classic. But I think it's regardless, it's a movie that people should see if they're
Mhm.
interested in haunted house movies. It's definitely one of the most famous and probably one of the most influential.
The other aspect that I thought was weird that didn't really bother me initially when I saw it, but actually did kind of bother me this time. It's like they did very little developing those kids. It's like you can
Mhm.
almost forget like not just the names of the kids, but even how many kids are in the house. It's like you have like the whole movie. It's like they could have picked like maybe one or two scenes to like establish the kids on some kind of level. I mean, I did think it was interesting because I think in real life they were the parents of both of their kids. As far as what I know, I didn't do like
Yeah.
extensive research with the kids stuff. They were the mother and father of the kids. The movie portrays it as he's not the father. On the rewatch, like I didn't really remember a lot of the movie into the rewatch, so I thought that would have been a bigger part of it on this
Hmm.
rewatch. I was like, oh, they're not his kids, so like that's part of what's going to go into his psychosis. It's like, man, I got to deal with this fucking bitch and her goddamn kids that aren't even mine. It's like I thought that would
Yeah.
play into it, but it didn't.
Yeah.
It's like why even mention that they're not his kids? A, because I don't think that's part of the real story, and B, they didn't really use it at all. Like I thought that would be for me. Like I don't have kids. Like I can imagine falling in love with a woman, and like she has these kids. It's like, man, I don't have kids. I don't even know if I particularly want kids. And I'm at the point in my life where it's like it's now or never, and like now I'm
Hmm.
stuck with these fucking brats that are running around this goddamn house that I can't even fucking afford. My business is going to shit. These kids won't shut the fuck up, and like I could see like aspects of that can help in the character development, like with him going over the edge and her being torn, where it's like she loves him, but she loves her kids. Don't make me choose. It's like there's so many elements of that could be developed for like more drama and lead to him like just like losing it. But I felt they kind of dropped the ball on that.
Well, I think it's there a little bit, but yeah, they maybe could have gone further into that. Although the movie is 2 hours long, so maybe
Mm-hmm.
they were just thinking it's too long. But speaking of creepy kids, though, I think the daughter is very creepy in a couple of scenes in this
Mm-hmm.
movie.
Yeah.
So, and also there's a trope here that we will see again, I think, which is the little girl or the child who seems to be communicating with somebody who isn't there. A
Yeah, we
ghost.
see that a lot after
Yeah,
this. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, there was. Speaking of the kid, there was the really one really creepy scene where the babysitter's stuck in the closet, and
yes.
then James comes home. He's like, "What do you mean you're stuck in the closet? There's no fucking lock on the door." It's like that was an
Yes.
interesting that was an interesting twist. I was like, that's
Yeah.
you did
Yeah.
pretty good there,
Yeah.
movie. That's
Yeah.
good
Oh, yeah.
movieing, movie. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And I mean, that's a scene that horrified me when I was 10 years old, too. I just
Yeah.
found that very, very scary. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't see that coming at all. The
Yeah.
fact that he would show that was pretty well executed. There are
Yeah.
some really good moments, and like I said, overall it is a very good movie. Just a few faults in there, but every movie has its flaws, and
Yeah.
this is definitely not just the movie itself, but again, its legacy of the sequels, the remake, the fact that it made so much money, the fact that it cost so little money, the whole true story thing, the Warrens aspect of it, the feuding with the parapsychologists, the whole backstory. There's a lot of good. The fact that Amityville is a real place, it's a real house. The town is that's the only thing the town is known for. There's a lot there that really warrants this movie. Get it?
Yeah.
Warrants.
Yeah. I
That's
heard
what
that,
I'm
actually. Yeah. I
looking.
heard that.
This
I heard
movie
that.
being on this list. So,
Very clever.
I try.
Yeah.
I'm not writing stories for TV shows, but I do what I
Yeah.
can.
You could. You could. Yeah.